want to hear from a group that's out there doing some great things in the community. Snohomish for Equity. Uh, Representing Snohomish for Equity, Kathy Purviance-Snow, are you here?
Right here, Terry.
Hey, and we have Lisa Odom. Are you here?
I am. I'm here.
All right. Thank you guys for joining us here tonight. Kathy, if you want to kick it off, we got about 10, 15 minutes. And let's hear what's going on with Snohomish for Equity.
Well, can I just let Lisa start? She's going to give you some background as to why the group started, and we'll make that brief. And then I'll tell you about some of the things that Snohomish for Equity has been doing for the last couple of years here in Snohomish.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I'm just going to give a little brief history on how Snohomish for Equity formed. So back in 2017, I think most of you can recall an incident that made national news in Charlottesville, North Carolina, when a racial hatred group decided to have a rally in the local town, and peaceful protesters came in to protest that hate coming to their town. So I just feel like there's so many similarities going on. As a result, a protester was murdered during that time. And at the time, there was a few moms and I, we were at a senior function for our new to be senior class youth. And we started talking about that incident and some concerns that we had, because there was a group of local teen leaders who had posted a picture with the Confederate flag and posted over the internet. And it was a concern because there was not just that incident, but numerous incidents that had been accumulating over time. And as the other moms and I got to talking, I was sharing my story where I've had to, and Kent said, how do we educate our teachers and how to deal with these situations? I started that back in 2012 when I was going to the teachers and the schools and the principals within the district, asking them to look at learnings and bring some education around this piece so that the staff could assist youth of color that are in their classroom when they're receiving these incidents of hate. So fast forward to that day, we just started networking, and we didn't like the responses we were getting from the school district. So we started meeting, and we continued to meet. We asked for meetings with the district and the superintendent and the principals, and we started moving forward, just working with what can we do to help our staff and our kids be more welcoming, and also to address issues of hate. So that's where we started. Within 1 year, a year later, in August of 2018, we actually formed to be a nonprofit because, again, we had incidences of hate in our town where it's okay to be white signs were going up. And again, you know, the Confederate flag coming up again. So we said enough is enough. We didn't move fast enough in the year. And so we became a nonprofit and started holding regular events. And so there was people that knew about us, and we got out there and we had lots of people at our events. And we kind of kicked off, and I'll pass it over to Kathy. We kind of kicked off when we had our first big meeting planned, just letting people know that this stuff is happening. I feel like we're repeating 2018 again in our community, and people are waking up. And as Charlie said earlier, the dust is starting to arise again, and the lights being shined on again. And so Snohomish for Equity has been here since 2018, and we are here to stay, and we are here to move forward. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kathy to let you guys know what we do.
Okay, so we do host several community events. We try and have a few community events a month. We started off in September of 2018. We also worked with the city council to get resolution 1389 out there. The mayor and the council members signed that we are a city that is dedicated to having racial inclusion and not intolerance, and that we would stand against any sort of intolerance in our city. We've had several panel discussions with members of our community that are people of color, and they shared their stories. There were heart-wrenching stories about incidences that took place. One of those happened, well, up at Glacier Peak. We'd set up our panel, and then the incident at Glacier Peak where the students were sending all sorts of racist and homophobic messages and hotspots that they named. And so that was a very well-attended event. We also held a Holocaust remembrance. We co-sponsored Juneteenth with the Snohomish County NAACP last year. We've shown the movie 13th. All of these things were designed to help our community know and develop a consciousness of becoming anti-racist. Because we live in a white supremacist society, it's not good enough to just say, well, I'm not a racist. You have to become anti-racist. You have to go against the flow. And we are trying to help our community members to go against the flow and stem the tide of racism and white supremacy. We held an event where we had our Native Americans talk to us about walking through cedars. We hosted recently a 21-day challenge, and in response to the events that are going on in town, we have reposted that 21-day challenge. We've been working with the school district, and we got the school district to change some of the language around discipline, where racially charged incidences were no longer just considered harassment, but they were tagged properly as being racist, and that would be dealt with in a different manner. We've also admonished SSD to change their athletic code, because we know that in sports, sometimes children and young adults utilize language that is inappropriate, hateful, and racist. And we need to have that athletic code strengthened and changed. That has not happened yet, but we are hoping that it will happen. We started a youth committee to provide a voice and advocacy for our youth so that they too can talk to their peers about anti-racism. This is at both high schools. We developed a scholarship so that we could celebrate students who are working hard to further goals of equity and inclusion and diversity. As you know, or maybe you aren't aware, we hold several bystander intervention trainings. We've had one a week, and we're going to have another one coming up in July. We held the Rally for Racial Justice on Saturday, May 31st, and in my opinion, that was what started this whole thing off on May 30th. And then May 31st was a response to that, because we know that white supremacists are trying to utilize intimidation. We supported Generation Justice's efforts to talk with the town about becoming anti-racist and all of their rallies. We love our young people. They are just so full of hope, and we want to make sure that their voices continue to be heard, and that those in this generation above them and older are listening and embracing the message of inclusivity. We held a Juneteenth run. We're going to continue to work with our community. We are not leaving. I personally have lived in this area for 24 years. I work at Snohomish High School. I don't plan on moving away. I am committed to seeing my town become a better version of itself. And so to that end, we want to welcome everyone to our board meetings. Our next one is going to be held July 6th at 6 p.m. We're going to post a Zoom link so that the community can join in and help us to change the narrative of Snohomish. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Lisa. Appreciate all of your hard work in the city with Snohomish for Equity, doing some great things, and I wish you continued success. Again, thank you for being here with us tonight. Right now, it is a little after 8, let's call it 8:03. And what we want to do is open this thing up to the community, because really, ultimately, we've heard from a lot of the leaders in this community. We've heard from law enforcement. We've heard from people who interpret the law. We've heard from our educators. We've heard from our faith-based community. And of course, we've just heard from Snohomish for Equity. But now it's all about the people. And if we want to affect change, we want Snohomish to be what we want it to be, it needs to come from the community. So we're going to open this thing up for questions. You can ask whatever you want of whoever you'd like. We want to keep it brief though. To ask a question, please raise your hand in the Zoom controls, and Pat Adams, our city clerk, will call your name. Please limit your questions to 1 minute because we want to hear from as many people as we can, and we want to get the responses in turn. So at this point, we are opening it up for questions. If you have one, raise your hand.
Okay, thank you. B20, do you have a question for our panel? B20, do you have a question? Hello?
Yes, this is Tom Burke. I have a question for Mr. Weed or Chief Palmer, and that is, what was the plan if the Antifa had showed up? What would have been the plan if shooting had started? And where is the issue of proportionality? If someone throws a brick through a window, is that justification for shooting that person and potentially killing him? So what was the plan, and how are you addressing the liability issue of the town for allowing the gathering? And if someone had gotten shot, what action would you have taken?
I think that sounds more like up my alley, Grant. I'll start with that one. The plan for civil unrest, property damage, those kinds of things, it had a group like Antifa or some agitator infiltrated what was otherwise a peaceful protest, was the reason that we had the response team staged up, and we called the county alert team to the location. So that would have been the next step up, would have been quote unquote riot control, or the use of the civil disturbance team. Property damage in and of itself does not justify deadly force, obviously. So had somebody taken deadly force action, we would have had to have gone into a very, very tense and difficult situation as law enforcement. And that's one of those situations where, again, is tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving, and we have to respond and adapt to the situation as it occurs. So the plan is to have the presence, have the resources, and have a rapid response to what is evolving. But had it turned into some kind of a shooting or worse, that's something we just have to deal with on the spot, using the best tactics available under the circumstances, rely on our training and rely on our equipment. It is worst case scenario. And I can't be more specific than that, because until something like that actually occurs, you can only prepare and have an outline of a plan, but you can't have a detailed plan of step A through C, and then you move to C.2, and then you move on to D. It just doesn't work that way. So that's the best answer I can give had that occurred. But that is why we prepared and brought in those resources and set up the Emergency Operations Center. And we did also have the ability to call in additional resources if necessary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Evelyn, do you have a question for the panel?
Yes, I do. So first, I wanted to thank Emily for her presentation on free speech earlier, but I do have a follow-up question with regards to free speech and the notion of true threat. From the perspective of a queer person, if I'm called a fag, because of the history of that word, I know that I need to fear for my life. Before people are beaten to death, those are the kinds of words that they hear. So as part one of my question, I would love if you could speak to how the use of violent derogatory terms like the N-word or gay slurs are defined or protected by the Constitution, and does the law protect people who commit hate crimes in favor of these free speech protections? And then sort of a follow-up to that, are we providing our due diligence to people who are victims of hate crimes in favor of defending what some might defend as free speech? Similarly, a question for Grant Weed. When you discuss the credentials required to arrest someone, I will quote you here. You said, analyzing a number of complex factors, end quote. These complex factors are the ones that we're questioning currently. Quote, complex factors are the kinds of cases where people of color are held to a different standard than white people. How are we as a community addressing those cases? You also said, quote, every circumstance will be different. Because of implicit bias, things like, I'll use examples that you used, the loud their voice, their posture, etc., is systemically set up to benefit white people and to harm Black people, because the circumstances can be he wore a hoodie, or he had dark skin and thus was inherently more threatening, or he seemed dangerous. How can we move forward with the knowledge of these biases and be sure that they are taken into account in our policing, our court systems, the defenders that represent these people, and the people who make the laws initially? To quote Mr. Weed again, would the
Okay,
limit?
that's 1 minute. Did you want to continue?
Yeah, could I just wrap up this part?
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Another quote was, would a reasonable person of average or normal sensitivity feel threatened by this? But even this statement has implicit bias present, because average in the societal context means straight, white, and likely male. So would a white man be under the same perceived threat if they are called the same slurs meant for a Black trans woman? No, they wouldn't. But those words will be life-threatening to people in higher risk groups. How are we going to address the issues of implicit bias that run through our communities? I'd love specifically to hear from Grant Weed on that, and I would love to hear from anyone else who feels like they can speak to the ways with which our local government will run forward with that.
Grant, I'll start since the first question had to do with the speech. And I'm kind of going to touch on the ending part of your question as well. Unfortunately, the law is pretty reactionary. And so what was a true threat when the Supreme Court was first grappling with these issues is not necessarily the same thing as it is now. Our job, the most that we can do is analyze and essentially guess as to how a court's going to interpret one thing or another. And so while we may agree that these do have different biases attached to what the current standards are, unfortunately, there's not a lot of guidance on our end of things to be able to react to that. So yes, the language that you use is going to be more threatening based on the receiver, and that is going to be taken into account. However, none of those types of cases have worked its way up to be what we consider binding case law for us to be able to actually provide some guidance. A lot of these things are culture shifts that have to occur really outside of our legal framework in order to make those transitions in the courts. And I think Grant had mentioned the statement by our local county judges and their commitment to recognizing these biases and in our Washington Supreme Court and taking actions to mitigate that. And at this point, because the law is reactionary, it is hard to, I guess, give a full and complete answer as to what may or may not happen when those types of statements are said. Grant, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. You're on mute.
I think you covered it as well as we can under the circumstances, but I will turn to the question or questions that were directed to me. The context of the comments that I was making were mostly with reference to the state statute that has to do with the unlawful carrying of firearms with the intent and in a manner to intimidate and that warrants alarm for the safety of other persons. And The standards and the complex factors I was referring to come from stare decisis, which is a string of cases that our courts have decided over the years. In administering a statute, a court is going to just not read the words of the statute, but they're going to apply the evidence and the facts to each case where a crime is charged. And so when an individual feels like they've been threatened or believes that there's been an intent to intimidate, the individual needs to file a report and needs to contact law enforcement so an investigation can occur. If a person is charged with that crime, there is going to be a trial unless they plead out. And in that trial, all the evidence that's relevant comes in. And it comes in whether it's with respect to your race or your gender or your other religious beliefs. And in those cases, the key is going to be what were the circumstances that caused the threat? What were the circumstances that caused the alarm? And would that have been the case for a person of normal sensitivities? Because everyone does have a separate level of sensitivities. The fact that it might be dark out, the fact that it might be a person that's got their gun out of a holster, the fact that the person looks and is acting angry, all relate to that. And it might have a higher level of concern to some people in our culture than others. But the courts have said, we've got to measure the test based upon what people in our community accept as reasonable sensitivities and not extremes. That's what our law says. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's what our courts have decided over many, many years of deciding these cases.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your question as well.
Okay. Anna, would you like to ask a question? Anna? Anna? Okay, we'll move on to the next. Oh, Anna? Okay. Heather, would you like to ask a question? Heather? Okay. Rachel, would you like to ask a question? Okay, something's going on here. Rachel? Interesting.
I'm here. I'm
here.
here.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks. I would like to ask, why has there not been an independent review of the events of May 31st, June 1st, and June 2nd? I just listened to Interim Chief Palmer's report and heard some factual inaccuracies in the report. For example, he said that there was no police viewed anyone being harassed, the girls being harassed on First Street, and there's actual video evidence of that. And as well as a couple of other things with the timeline. And so I would like to ask why the city of Snohomish has not asked for an independent review of what happened in order to advise future activities, because I don't think the chief had it right. I think he did a pretty good job putting pieces together, but he missed a few things and had some factual inaccuracies in his record. So I'm wondering, what would it take to get an independent review?
That question was aimed for Chief Roberts.
Okay, I I don't have the authority, I don't believe, to call for some independent review, and frankly, I don't know that one's necessary. I recognize Mrs. Scoto's concerns. If there's video of that, it's never been presented to the Snohomish Police Department. My comment was that no officer directly observed that occur, and again, no 911 call resulted from that. So if there's video of the kids being harassed, and I differentiate that from the assault because I'm talking about two different events, but I don't understand what the question is regarding an independent review, whether you're asking for the state patrol or somebody to come in and investigate that. I don't know that A, it's necessary, or B, that would be something I would call for. So that's why I kind of hesitated trying to answer the question. That would have to come from a body outside of me, whether it's council or whether it's the mayor, or whether it's a citizen group asking somebody else to look at the events. But what happened was organic and it happened rapidly. We made the best response we could to the events. We prepared as well as we believed we could based on the information we had. And while things got a little busy downtown, it never devolved into chaos, disorder, unrest, or property damage. So I don't really understand what there is to review. And that's essentially my answer to that.
Grant, so I'm going to jump in. This is Jason Sanders for anybody who can't see me on this, council president with the council. So maybe not specific to this issue, although it may play into that. Who has the authority to ask for, in this case, an independent review of a law enforcement operation? I'm asking this very openly because I'm not sure, and we're being asked by the council or by the community on this at times. Is that even something that can come from city council? So I would ask that of Grant.
My response to that would be, as we know, the city of Snohomish contracts for law enforcement services with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. And if the council wished to have a review, say, for example, of the law enforcement response, the request would go to the county sheriff. I do think that Captain Palmer's given a very detailed explanation of the strategy and tactics that were put in place on the spur of the moment for this incident, and probably has disclosed more to the public than at times law enforcement would like to. But I think in the spirit of being transparent about what they were doing behind the scenes, I'm not sure a lot of people would have been aware of the things that were going on without Chief Palmer sharing that. So if there were a concern by the city that there was contractual provisions that weren't met, that could certainly be directed to the county. There isn't a legal process that I'm aware of that allows calling for a review of a civil unrest or a protest event. There are legal processes involved where there's a request to review as to whether a crime or certain crimes have been committed. But that needs to start with calling 911. It needs to start with filing a report with law enforcement so they have an opportunity to investigate.
Thank you, Grant. Pat, do we have any more questions?
Yes. Bill, would you like to ask a question? Bill Rockwell? Hello? Okay, we'll go to Jake. Jake, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I would. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right, fantastic. I wanted to direct my question to the school board and school district, and that would be, I guess it would be a two-parter. The first part would be, As you are ramping up in things like bystander intervention training and all of these such things, are you going to be involving either incoming or former students like the folks at Generation Justice as you revamp school district trainings? And what changes to the curriculum are being talked about, if any, to potentially address certain racial blind spots? For example, I'm a graduate of Snohomish High School. And I'd never heard the term Juneteenth before. It wasn't in the curriculum until this year outside. The Tulsa massacre was never covered. Things like that are pretty common points of history that just weren't covered in our curriculum. And I think that that's an opportunity for improvement. So I was wondering if we were looking at that at all.
Well, thanks, Jake, for that answer. I'm going to turn this over to Miriam Mickelson, since this is her specialty on this time. But, as we take a look at this, we have many areas that are under discussion, especially when we ramp in and bring in folks that come along beside us, that we can create a good framework of hitting all these areas, because there's just everything that we do we can take a look at. But I'm going to have Miriam talk a little bit about the curriculum and where we're going with that. So Miriam?
Yeah, thanks, Jake, for the question. So with regards to curriculum, one of the things that we started doing at Teaching and Learning was to look at the resources and textbooks and novels that our students are reading. It is unfortunate that in our district, and it's not unique to Snohomish, we don't have very diverse literature and curriculum resources. So we are looking at that, especially in light of statistics that have come out. In 2018, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, for example, put out research that showed that in children's literature, half of the characters are Caucasian, and then 25% of characters in children's literature are animals, and only 10% are Black characters, and 7% Hispanic. So that does not send a very good message to our students of color when there are more animals represented in children's literature than they. So that is certainly one area that we are looking at. We are also working on essential standards as a district, and as part of that work is looking at those standards that promote diversity, inclusivity, and social justice. So there is definitely plenty of work to do, and those are just the beginnings of the conversation right now.
Thank you, Miriam, for that answer. And thank you, Jake, for your question.
Karen, do you have a question? Karen? Okay, Bill, do you have a question? Bill
Yes.
Rockwell? Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, I am here. Do you hear me?
I do.
Oh, good, good, good. Thank you. Hey, so thank you, council and panel. I'm really glad we have several hours of voices being heard today, because we have people talking, and at the same time, we have to be careful about being constructive, not destructive. And I think it's a fact that there is a threat to Snohomish. Business owners and friends showed up to protect First Street and livelihoods. This at the same time is the unannounced protest on 2nd and D because of rain previous night, and a protest decided by protest organizers to walk up First Street through the area of threat. And I don't think they were ever meant to merge. And you know how bad this recipe was for our community through our experience now. Many are pointing fingers, blame out of the depth of their fear and angst, and each group came together to take a stand for what they were protecting. And it was never about race, but it became so. But we woke up, and now we find ourselves in this together. So lessons learned, what could improve. A couple of things: how volatility is addressed by community leadership immediately afterwards, how perimeters of threats are contained, coordinating routes of protesters, talking about how images are displayed and respected, prepping and coaching both sides before interaction, which is education. We're doing that now. How well the police and community are pre-coordinated during times of threat. It's reminded of Daryl Davis, a Black musician who convinced over 200 Klansmen to give up their robes. said when two enemies are talking, they're not fighting, they're talking. It might be yelling and screaming, but at least they're talking. And it's when the talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence. So my takeaway from that is that until then, we always have the fear of violence. So when we talk, the true change of heart will happen. City Council and other panel members present, what is a plan going forward for bringing these extreme sides together to talk and bring healing?
Any member from the council would like to address that question?
What do you think we're doing here? Well, come on, guys, speak. Tom, speak.
There's several things that we're doing. This is Tom Merrill, member of the City Council. And I think we began talking about that. We're putting together these forums so people have the opportunity to come together and talk about it, just like we're doing tonight. We're pointing out groups that are taking active steps to move forward and making sure that you know where they are and who they are, like Snohomish for Equity and the school district and the communities of faith, so you can get involved. Legislatively, there's not a whole lot we can do. So what we can do is we can create the forums, we can create the conversation, and that's where our focus has been, along with also declaring how we feel about declaring that the white supremacy, that the black folks matter, doing our policies, doing our statements, and encouraging people to join together with us to deal with this in the town.
To jump in, this is Jason, and I apologize. I was trying to unmute my phone, but I echo all of Tom's statements. I mean, within, I think it was within 5 or 6 days after the incident that we had on May 31st, there was a lot of activity that started going on, and there was written words, whether it was a reaffirmation of the proclamation that we had, whether there was statements from council. We brought together the group of Snohomish community leaders to start to talk about things and options that we can do to come together as a community. And it's very important. You know, one of the things that I heard from our community was, well, why was it a closed meeting? Who selected these people? I mean, these are great questions and problems to have, to be honest with you, in a short amount of time. To bring together people to start to have these conversations was very, very helpful. It doesn't mean by any means we're excluding people from moving forward on these things. In fact, really what we are recognizing is that the council plays an important role in all of this, but they're not going to be able to drive everything. So what Snohomish for Equity is doing is critical. What the school district is doing is critical. What the religious groups affiliations are doing is huge. The youth and the businesses are all coming together. I will say that the Snohomish Council is looking at what types of racial bias and awareness training that we need to have for our local government officials. And we've heard that from Snohomish for Equity. We're going to be challenged with what is this training we're going to look at. There's the Association of Washington Cities that works with local government, and there's Snohomish for Equity, and there's the school district, and there's a lot of trainings out there. So how do we find the right training for elected officials that is important to have, and we need to go through that? How do we connect that training so that what our students are hearing in the schools, and also what the council can do is partner with our community to be possibly even host this for people in the community who want to be part of this training too? I think are all ways that the council itself is going to look at these kind of opportunities to raise awareness and start to get the conversations going. Kathy, Purviance-Snow mentioned, you know, in one of our first meetings, the fact that we have about a 10% Hispanic population in town, and we don't even have, you know, a #4 on our button if you call into the city council to speak to somebody in Spanish language or other languages that we have. I mean, so these are great things that we can and will move forward on. But I really, and I respectfully say this, but the outpouring of hurt and suggestions from the community has been so important. But I think each of us have to also look inside and ask ourselves what we're doing and what we're going to bring to this. And when you get to that point, then figure out how you want to join part of these groups, whether it's Snohomish for Equity or the youth or the businesses. If you want to run for council, come and talk to any of your council members. We need people to be active and engaged moving forward. But I do believe we are all working together to do things to move forward in a positive direction.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Tom, for your answers. And Bill, thank you for your question and your commentary as well.
Jolene, would you like to ask a question?
Yes,
Jolene.
thank you very much. Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. My family and I live downtown. And, you know, first I want to say we appreciate our local law enforcement being responsive and engaging with our family right after incidents occurred. We empathize and appreciate your position. But my pointed and laser focused question is, what are we going to do moving forward? And I don't mean people that have spoken a lot and agree with us. We've heard a lot of faith community and students and teachers and superintendents speak, but I want to know specifically, what are the mayor and 2 city council members who have been mostly silent, although on social media or other things have been very vocal about how they feel, but we need to know, what are you going to do moving forward? Committees and things are a start, but they're a sounding board without engagement from the people who maybe aren't as in agreement. And so I want to know specifically from these people, what are they going to do moving forward to create positive change here?
I'd like to speak to that, if I may. So I think that, as Jason mentioned, as a city council, we have a legislative role, and that's pretty well defined. But I think that as community leaders, it's incumbent upon us to help facilitate the community and counsel the community. So individually, we may have our own different plans, whether it be engaging in training, working with a particular group that we're interested in. But from my perspective, I want to try and encourage more people from the community to get involved in government, and also to get involved in boards and commissions, so that those interactions help drive some of this positive change. We need more involvement in our government, because we're the government of the people. The council we cannot force people to change, and we can't force people to attend training, but we certainly can facilitate those conversations and those opportunities for the public.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Jolene, for your question and your commentary. Does anybody else want to add anything to that?
Yes, this is Karen. Thanks for unmuting me. I have a comment and a question. And my comment is, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate seeing all of the diverse representation of leadership here. I think that's really helpful. And I appreciate the straightforward information and the real attempt to be very candid. And I think that's terrific. I do see a missing face, and my only question is this, and maybe it's for Mr. Sanders, President of the Council. Was our mayor invited to this event this evening?
The mayor is joining as a participant. He's listening, as well as council member Countryman is also on the call, but he's had difficulty, I think, connecting with his computer. So you have all 7 council members as well as the mayor is on this call.
I appreciate that. I knew that Mr. Countryman was on, but I hadn't seen the mayor. So thank you for answering that question. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like
Jim,
to just make a, I'm sorry, Pat. I'd like to just make a quick comment. We are going to be looking at trainings. We're gathering information on that. So we will be trying to have individual education, and we individually as leaders will be looking at ourselves. So I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be taking that seriously.
Jim, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I got a question for a few questions and comments for the police chief. I'd like to know if you, I'm assuming you saw the police shaking hands with the vigilantes, and so I just want to know if you were in agreement with them doing such and getting so involved with them. Also, the Confederate flag was shown. It was shown on TV. It was shown multiple times. And as I drove downtown a few times, I saw it, and we like to call those, there were two pickup trucks next to each other. One had the Confederate flag and other stuff. And that's where the guys sat around there and drinking beer out of there. And I stopped one of the deputies and asked him if they were supposed to be drinking like that. And he said he didn't know. He questioned me, "Are you sure, sir?" And I said, "Yes, there are people drinking." And I watched him drive away, and he drove right by them and didn't ask them a thing. I also want to say it's kind of, I think it's a little bit discerning when you say things like you didn't see any guns, or there were no guns, I should say, and the police did everything or whatever. But you weren't there the whole time. You weren't there along the whole march, so you don't know those things for sure. So I think people might take offense to that being so, like you're so sure of that. And then as follow up to one of your other answers, you said it sounded like you were saying that, I mean, does someone need to call 911 for a police officer to protect people that are in a fight? I mean, one of your response was, well, no one called 911, and I just wondering what that has to do with someone getting beat up while police officers are around. And the last thing I have is for Snohomish for Equity. Is there a chance that you could set up something where we could send in pictures and videos that we have personally taken or have found, so that we can collect all that information together and hand off to the appropriate people? Thank you.
Okay, there's a fair amount for me to try to get through on that. First of all, on the Confederate flag issue, I was talking about Sunday in particular. I did not see any Confederate battle flag on Sunday. Now, after I left, could one have shown up? Absolutely. I do know that there was one on Monday. I didn't specifically address that. Yes, we know that there was one there, but it goes back to, it's a free speech issue. We can't make it go away. Had I seen it, I would have certainly asked the person to put it away because of the tension that it creates. As far as saying I didn't see anybody with guns, I'm not sure if you were talking about something else. I personally didn't see anybody that was armed drinking alcohol on Sunday during the time I was there. That was my specific thing I wanted to point out. And if I had, I would have contacted them about just the visible, the optics of that and the sensibility of it. As far as the fight is concerned, my point was that it occurred in an area that wasn't where any of the police on duty that night were at. They didn't personally witness it or see it. Nobody came and reported it to us. Nobody told us anything until a couple of days later. So when you have a large crowd of people on the street, as we did Monday night, and the 2 or 3 officers that were on duty, if they're at a different location and don't know that it occurred and it's not reported to them, we do need that call, or we need somebody to come and find police to report that. Eventually they did, and that's when it was investigated. I think I hit the major points. Was there another question for me that the caller asked that I didn't address? Anyone?
I think that covered what he had for you. There
Okay.
was a question for Snohomish.
Are you there?
Yeah, this is, go ahead, Kathy. This is Lisa Odom with Snohomish for Equity. So a couple things. Just one, I do know that we had video and provided that to the police within 3 hours of the assault. So just to kind of clarify that, we'll be happy to collect information, and we'll work on getting something set up in regards to those incidents. Obviously, when certain things happen, we want law enforcement to be notified right away, but we also, NAACP also has legal regress for Snohomish County, and incidents can be reported to there, as well as the ADL and the Southern Poverty Law Center. So I do encourage all of those agencies to be notified, but I think specifically in Snohomish, our board is happy to gather some information. Obviously, we're looking into this situation even further and just want to make sure all the facts are out there and straight.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate your commentary. And thank you for your question. We have time for about one more question before we wrap it up for the evening. So let's hear it.
Okay, Jake, do you have a question for the panel?
Yeah, I do. This question is for Chief Palmer. And just to speak broadly, what kinds of trainings and reforms, given the recent news, do you support for both the Snohomish Police and the sheriff at large? Is there any? Has Snohomish County done warrior style training? Is that something you would support, or would you like to take potentially a more de-escalation training kind of approach going forward?
Some question. So no, we don't do warrior training. We do response training, and we do have a lot of de-escalation training. What's coming out of I-940, the Citizens Initiative for independent investigations of officer uses of force, especially deadly force, there's a huge training component of that the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center is putting on, and it's going to require law enforcement across the state, every commissioned law enforcement officer, to go through de-escalation training. And there is a history component about the history of racism that's mandatory training. I can tell you that the Sheriff's Office, we do minimum annual training on bias-based policing. It's one of our core requirements. We have a lot of in-depth in-service training for our supervisors. We bring in folks to our supervisors training where all sergeants and above are in a room together, and some of those trainings have included bias-based policing, race-based intervention, those kinds of things. So I think as an agency, we're very progressive on bias-based policing and eliminating that and watching for the signs of it. And then secondarily, the state is leading right now around the country with the revisions to officer uses of force and the training that is going to come out of that. It's still in development, and COVID-19's hampered that just because we can't attend classes at the Criminal Justice Training Center. So what they're working on is doing statewide regional training where they'll come in and provide that. So a lot of the calls for police reform that have gone around the country, Washington State is already implementing them, but these are super in-depth, and these are, I think it's at least 80 hours of training. So it's going to take time to get everybody through that, but it's a process that we started in this state over a year ago, and it was finalized with the details last December, and it's in place. I know from working on it that the reforms to independent investigations of officer involved uses of force statewide, we have redrafted our SMART protocol, and that's been put out. So it's a great question. There's a lot in that, but I can tell you that the Sheriff's Office in particular, which by definition means that the Snohomish Police Department and Washington State are doing a lot in the realm of racial history training, bias-based police training, and de-escalation training.
Thank you, Chief Palmer, for that response. And Jake, thank you very much for that question as well. At this point, we need to start wrapping this up. And I think we've got a lot of information from a lot of great sources tonight. It's a great place to start from. But at this point, I think we need to take the next step and see where we go with this thing. How do we keep the momentum going? How do we just not let this fall by the wayside and become just an afterthought 2 weeks from now? So what I'd like to do is to have each group that was represented here tonight have one spokesperson, kind of tell us how you plan on maintaining momentum moving forward. Just give me 1 minute, 2 minutes max of what you think we need to do as a group community to help keeping this thing moving forward. And we'll start with Grant Weed and Emily Gildner, whichever one of you guys want to represent the city attorney's office. How do we keep the momentum going?
Thank you, Terry. I think that's probably the perfect introduction to the letter that our judicial community has written to all lawyers within our county. And it may take just a minute or two to read this letter, but I think it's important enough for everyone to hear what all 15 of our Superior Court judges and 5 court commissioners have said, and it's said in conjunction with the communication that our state Supreme Court set out. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to read this. Dear members of the Snohomish County legal community, our country is still plagued by the scourge of racism, and people of color continue to suffer a system that devalues and degrades their lives. Today, we answer the call from the Washington State Supreme Court to join them in an historic effort to eradicate racism in all its forms and wherever found within our system of justice. We echo the words of our highest court in acknowledging the painful fact that for centuries, Black Americans have struggled to enjoy the rights promised to all Americans by our Constitution, and instead have continued to face the horrors of racism and brutality. We see plainly the overrepresentation of Black Americans in the criminal justice system. We must recognize that responsibility for these wrongs belongs to all of us, and that our courts have contributed to the systemic racism that exists in our communities. We agree with the Washington State Supreme Court's observation that legal professionals, lawyers, and judges alike bear responsibility for ensuring that systemic racism and discrimination is eradicated in all of its insidious forms. We hereby dedicate ourselves to being part of the solution. The Snohomish County Superior Court judicial officers have been educated about the unconscious bias that can affect legal decision-making by judges and juries. We pledge to persistently search within ourselves to identify our implicit biases and to be vigilant in ensuring that these biases do not influence how we receive evidence or render decisions in individual cases that come before the court. We have put in place measures to share this training with each new juror and encourage them to also be aware of and guard against their own biases. We know that there is more work to be done. As a bench, we are committed to the principles of justice, fairness, and equality, and we will continue to strive to achieve these principles each day. Part of this means taking a hard look at our own institution and rooting out discriminatory practices where we find them and diversifying our workforce to better represent the community we serve. This also means taking a hard look at our individual actions every day in our interactions with coworkers and other members of our communities. Systemic racism does not exist in a vacuum. It is the product of our collective actions. We must continue to reflect on how our individual actions enable racial injustice and discrimination, and consistently strive to live up to the principles of justice, fairness, and equality that we have sworn to uphold. We must make sure that our public condemnation of racism is not merely an act done to make us feel good about ourselves today. Rather, our words must come from a place of real concern and a genuine desire to do and demand better. We call on the members of our own legal community to be vigilant and tireless in a shining light on discriminatory laws and practices and working with us to end them. Now is the time for all citizens to come together to work for change. As the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. reminded us, quote, "Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals," end quote. We join with the justices of the Washington State Supreme Court to reaffirm our deepest level of commitment to achieving justice by ending racism. and signed individually by each of our 15 members of our Superior Court and the 5 court commissioners.
Thank you, Grant. Very strong words indeed. Very strong words indeed. We would like to hear from the Chief. Chief Palmer, please let us know some final thoughts and how we can keep the ball moving forward.
Yeah, for the PD and myself and my people, it's obviously working with the community, recognizing the appearances that we create that cause concern for minority groups, people of color, people of different ethnic backgrounds, and people of just everything that isn't us, and how we conduct ourselves that creates negative perceptions. And working with the city council and with the mayor and with the city government as leaders to make sure that we're working together, and then also working with the community groups and engaging with them. That's something that's totally on me, and I plan to lead by example with my people, and then pay attention to the details. You know, asking my officers not to wear blue line flags on their uniforms, because that has started to become a point of contention, and it creates a perception that it's us against them. It means something different to law enforcement, but the perception that it creates with other members of the public is something we just don't need to display right now overtly, and it's not part of the uniform. So, you know, I've asked them not to wear those out right now, just because of the tension and the potential for tension that it could create. So small things like that, communicating with my people about expectations, and then also about watching for any indications of bias amongst ourselves and calling it out when you see it, or if you see it. Somebody making a joke that could be considered offensive to a minority group, or somebody and telling your friend or your partner or your coworker, that's not okay. We have to be better at that as police officers, and not join in the locker room mentality or the closed community of law enforcement, that it's okay for us to talk amongst ourselves in a certain way and to talk a different way to the public. It has to be the same. We can't come into the police department or go car to car and say something that doesn't reflect the expectations of the public amongst ourselves. And if that happens, is to call your buddy out and say, that's not okay. And I believe that. I've said this in a couple of forums. I'm absolutely against any form of racism. I hate it, and I will do everything I can to work with anybody to stamp that out, certainly in law enforcement when I see it, but within the community as well. There's just no place for it. And just because it's a big topic now doesn't mean that it shouldn't have been a big topic a long time ago, and it has been. And that does need to continue. I think there is momentum right now nationally that needs to continue. I just want it to be done peacefully, and I want it to be done within the law, because that's my oath and that's my responsibility. But I'm here to protect everybody's rights equally and to try to maintain safety, order, and security within the city of Snohomish. And that's what I'm going to work for.
Thank you, Chief Palmer. We appreciate it. We appreciate your service, and you got a big job ahead of you. I'm looking forward to seeing this thing really progress. And like we said, moving the ball forward with the community members and the police department as well. Thank you. Snohomish School District. Kent, do you want to take the ball and run with it?
Sure. You know, I think what we're doing here is where it's at, is we bring together all of the, the stakeholders of the community, whether it's the city and the police department and us in the community to do this, to have the conversations, but the conversations have to lead into action. And I'm excited for where the district is. That last winter we put together a plan to start educating, because I truly believe, as my passion is that education is the key to really change the minds of our folks. And I'm excited to say that we're starting that with our board. We're continuing with our administration and getting into our staff down the road, where the students will be involved also, but building that framework, but also being invited into these conversations such as tonight, to know that the power and the resources in our community is great when we come together. Being on Jason's committee that he had earlier, the think tank that we had going, or this committee here, That's the power we have as Snohomish. The thing that we have to do as we move forward is just not to let complacency take over as we slip back into our lives, but to take charge and to move forward and to be with one another as we soldier on in this quest that we have. But I am excited. The learning that's coming up and the training that's coming up is going to make a difference in the education in Snohomish. Thank you.
Charlie. We appreciate that very much, Kent. From our Snohomish faith-based communities, Charlie.
Yeah, let me share some thoughts first from Eliasine, who encourages us to think of Snohomish not simply to include people of color, but also to embrace and celebrate the contributions that they make to our lives and community. So not just simply to include, but really to celebrate what they contribute. Other things I think that are really helpful to do are a number of groups have come out already with statements against racism that I think would be a powerful statement when put together, and maybe an article in the Everett Herald that says all of these different groups have come out saying that we're against all forms of racism, from the city council to the Snohomish for Equity to the faith-based group, from the superintendent of schools, from the downtown Snohomish Historic District, all of us having statements, and including the sheriff too having a statement as well. I think that speaks powerfully when it's a united front like that. I think in pursuing education opportunities for our community and working together with, particularly with Snohomish for Equity in doing that. And finally, I just would mention a great idea I thought that came from Keisha Bottoms, who's the Atlanta mayor. She said, think about taking 9 minutes. For the 9 minutes that George Floyd couldn't breathe, let's think of 9 things you could do to make a positive difference, such as, and I'm just throwing out some ideas. Read a book on racial inequality. Join Snohomish for Equity. Write letters to our congressional reps. Send flowers and notes to friends who are people of color, and let them know you're glad they're here in our community and for their contribution. Come out and join the peaceful protest. Things like that. But think of 9 positive things we can do in honor of life.
Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate your contributions here tonight. Snohomish for Equity.
Yes, thank you, Charlie. I just want to also thank you publicly for allowing us to hold our book group when we were able to meet in person. When we would have our book group, we were able to meet at the First Presbyterian Church. So thank you, Charlie, for supporting us. As you know, Snohomish for Equity, we are a community-based organization. We love our town. We just want to see our town, like I said, become the best version of itself, and to work together to form an anti-racist society. One way to do that, if I can share my screen, we are going to hold this book club on Tuesday, August 11th from 6:30 to 8:30. It's going to be an online discussion. Because more likely than not, we are not going to have in-person meetings. But you as a community are welcome to go ahead and get this book. And there are lots of activities in this book that you can do. It's sort of like a 21-day challenge. We do ask that you show up and continue to work through these ideas that maybe you are not even aware of. Maybe you have, well, we all have implicit biases because we live in a white supremacist society. We need to actively tear down that system and work towards a system of inclusion. Also, as I stated earlier, we open our board meetings up to our community. And so our board meeting, our next one is going to be Monday, July 6th at 6 p.m. and we welcome community comments. And finally, we have a bystander training that is going to be offered on July 8th. We will post that on our website so that folks can register. That is also going to be at 6:30. We want our community to link arms and to show the fact that we are united against white supremacy, that we are all about celebrating the lives of everyone, not just tolerating differences. That used to be a really big thing, tolerance. No, no, acceptance. Acceptance is so much more inclusive, so that when my sons come to town and visit, which my oldest does not come to this town anymore, when he comes to this town, he is not stopped by the police for driving a nice car, nor are my other children looked at with suspicion because they happen to come to visit their mom. So I welcome all of our community to join us in this endeavor. And don't let your voices go unheard. Make sure that you vote and hold your elected officials responsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate it. At this point, I want to turn the town hall meeting over to Linda Redmond to wrap things up. But before I do, I just want to first say thank you. Thank you all for having me here tonight as your moderator. It's been my honor. It's been my pleasure. I have been encouraged by the leadership that I've seen here tonight. I think this is a great launch point for the city of Snohomish moving forward. I'm encouraged by the fact that, you know, the young people in this community are going to be the ones to lead us into the next century, are going to be the ones with the attitudes and not the tolerance, the acceptance and the embracing of all races, all sexual preferences, all creeds, all religions. And I'm so looking forward to that. And I'm excited to be a Snohomish resident. And I think our city can be, again, the best small town in America, like our moniker says. So with that, thank you, and turn it over to Ms. Redmond.
Thank you so much, Terry. I so appreciate you, leading us all through this experience. Oh, goodness. I'm sorry. I lost you. Sorry about that. Zoom faux pas. But I just wanted to say, I recommend to everybody who's here, who's listening, to attend the Snohomish for Equity Bystander Intervention Training. It is a short training, but you will learn a lot, and you will be left with real tools for combating microaggressions and overt racism in your day-to-day life, things that you had probably never thought of before, but your eyes will be opened. I highly recommend it. And thank you, Snohomish for Equity, for offering those trainings. And I just have to say, just look at this whole group of people here. We have some amazing people in this community, and I'm so much more hopeful after listening to all the plans and all the work that people have been putting forward. We're going to come out of this. We're going to be stronger as a community. And, we do have work, though. I just want to thank everybody that's here tonight, all of our panelists, all of the attendees. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but we will be having more of these. I did want to say that talking about racism is difficult and it can be uncomfortable. We need to recognize and confront that discomfort because it tells us that we have issues that need to be addressed. Each of us must do the deep and difficult work required instead of just doing superficial actions that make us feel better but don't really change anything. Since the May 31st incident, many members of our community have come together with the hope of creating positive change. This town hall is one of many ways to engage with these issues. You heard tonight about efforts within our school district, faith communities, and Snohomish for Equity, and we encourage you to reach out to these resources for further information or to get involved. You have seen the inspiring protests also organized by the youth of our community, and there will be more efforts led by community, youth, and business leaders. These will present other opportunities for you to take action. Your elected leaders are also working to increase awareness and ensure equity within city government and to provide resources and foster partnerships across the community. Positive change will not occur with one person or one organization. It will take our entire community working together. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you so much, Terry, for your wonderful guidance.
Linda?
And yes, I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
I'd just like to say, I think that the events that led up to the showdown, I guess you could say, on First Street on the 31st was an unfortunate occurrence, but I think that what we found from the discussion tonight that that was a decision, that was a series of events that had, as far as I'm concerned, little to do with racism. I think it was a response to two different groups of people who were, by hook or by crook, in conflict. I think that we've allowed this situation to sort of spiral out of control. I think that prior to this event on May 31st, we probably could have gone downtown and asked almost every one of the businesses down there to tell us what they thought about our town. And they would have said what Mr. Holliman said, that we're the all-American little city. You don't get to have people root for you as an all-American city when you have the degree of racism that you guys are all sharing with us tonight. I think that I object. I strenuously object to the idea that we are a white supremacist city. I can't imagine anybody ever characterizing our city in that way. It's painful to hear people talk about that, because that's not who our city is. We have struggled over the years to make our city the desirable city that it is, and I think that we have done a wonderful job of doing that. It's not to say there are not racist people in our community, because it's clear that there are. But to characterize our whole city as being white supremacist is wrong. And I think that if the majority of our community is involved in this discussion, they're going to share sentiments similar to mine. I've lived here 60 years. And in those 60 years, other than a couple of occasions, I have, and I don't characterize flying the Confederate battle flag as being something that is particularly horrifying to me. It's been a part of our culture for many, many years. It isn't something that I advocate, but it's certainly part of who we are. And it isn't, I mean, what we learned tonight through Grant Weed and Emily Gildner is that we have constitutional rights for those people who want to be flaky. And so we allow them to be flaky. Our job as city council people is to facilitate public dialogue. And I think we are doing a good job of that. But to accept the criticism from people in this that have spoken tonight that Snohomish is a systemically racist town is just wrong. That's just absolutely wrong. And I'm not going to put up with, for me personally, accepting the characterization that what we're doing, is racist, because it's just not right. We're not.
I think that Webster just changed the definition of racism officially. So I think that it would really help to relook at that, council member, and explore that a little bit further.
I agree.
Council member.
I'm sorry. Looks like you got muted there, Rachel. I've experienced this before when trying to talk about these issues. There is a certain amount of defensiveness that gets invoked when we try to talk about issues that maybe haven't been examined. They haven't been examined in your that you personally haven't maybe examined how this how structures that we have been built upon history that is racist. And so what we have been trying to talk about tonight is that some of what has always been accepted, racist elements that have always been accepted in our society because it has been a predominantly white society, that those elements, some of them got emboldened and were allowed to be present on the 31st. And that just showed that there wasn't enough vocal opposition to that presence.
Presence of what?
And of Confederate flags and people throwing signs and wearing patches for affiliation with groups that have been named as sort of hate groups, that those things were allowed by the people around them. Now, it sounds like from Captain Palmer talking about it, he would have talked to them. He didn't see them, but the community around them allowed them to stay there without saying, you know what, we don't like that here in our town because it hurts the businesses. It hurts the businesses that are trying to, you know, open up at this time. And I've heard that from the businesses myself, that they're suffering from being branded that way. And it just shows that there is a certain amount of acceptance of that. And that is what our valued panelists here tonight have been trying to say. I don't know if one of you with Snohomish for Equity or anybody else would like to speak to this, but I think that it's what we're trying to point out is that this is something that has been accepted and we need to no longer accept it in our community because it hurts people.
Thank you, Linda.
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up really fast. Mr. Dana, I don't know if you know me or remember me, but we met several years ago. And I would hope that you would consider with an open mind, and rather than taking offense, I want you to know and understand that while you personally may never experience racism, you may never even know that it's going on. It has gone on around you and it hurts people. And it drives the people from our community who we could use in this community to make it stronger and better. And all I'm asking for you to do, Mr. Dana, is to, with an open mind, just examine some of these things rather than shutting the door because it's hurtful. Because when we shut learning off, then we atrophy as an individual. And we all want to learn and to grow. And so I would hope that as a representative of our community, someone who's an elected official, that you would take this opportunity to embrace the thoughts of your constituents and find out why they believe the way they do. Whether or not you personally do believe that or don't believe that, you are a part of representative government, and I would hope that you would rise above and take this challenge on for yourself. I welcome you to come to any of our meetings, to go to any training, to sit and have a conversation with me personally. I would go out to coffee with you, and I would love to do that. So I hope that you will take this opportunity, and any of the council who may be on the fence, or maybe you're feeling defensive or hurt. That certainly isn't our intent. We want our community to be the best community possible. So that being said, as your neighbor, as someone who cares about this community, I would hope that you would be willing to engage in that work.
Thank you very much, Kathy. All right, I think that we have actually finished our town hall. Thank you all so much for being here. And I look forward to future conversations with all of you. I really appreciate every one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone. Our
much.
meeting is adjourned.
Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you.